Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave a speech titled, "Don't Sleep Through the Revolution," to the General Assembly of the Unitarian Universalist Association. The following paragraphs are excerpts from that speech in Dr. King's original language.
One of the great misfortunes in history is that all too many individuals and institutions find themselves in a great period of change and yet fail to achieve new attitudes and the outlooks that the new situation demands. There can be nothing more tragic than to sleep through a revolution, and there can be no gainsaying of the fact that a social revolution is taking place in our world today. We see it in other nations in the demise of colonialism. We see it in our own nation in the struggle against racial segregation and discrimination. And as we notice this struggle, we are aware of the fact that a social revolution is taking place in our midst. Victor Hugo once said that there is nothing more powerful in all the world than an idea whose time has come. The idea whose time has come today is the idea of freedom and human dignity. And so all over the world, we see something of a freedom explosion. And this reveals to us that we are in the midst of revolutionary times. An older order is passing away and a new order is coming into being.
The next thing that the church must do to remain awake through this revolution is to move out into the arena of social action. It is not enough for the church to work in the ideological realm and to clear up misguided ideas. To remain awake through this social revolution, the church must engage in strong action programs to get rid of the last vestiges of segregation and discrimination. It is necessary to get rid of one or two myths if we're really going to engage in this kind of action program. One is the notion that legislation is not effective in bringing about the changes that we need in human relations. This argument says that you've got to change the heart in order to solve the problem, that you can't change the heart through legislation. They would say you've got to do that through religion and education. Well, there's some truth in this. Before we can solve these problems, men and women must rise to the majestic heights of being obedient to the unenforceable. It may be true that morality cannot be legislated, but behavior can be regulated. It may be true that the law cannot change the heart, but it can restrain the heartless. The law cannot make a man love me, but it can restrain him from lynching me. And I think that's pretty important too. And so, while the law does not change the hearts of men, it does change the habits of men. So it is necessary for the church to support strong, meaningful civil rights legislation.
A second myth that we must deal with is that of exaggerated progress. Certainly, we have made progress in race relations. And I think we can all glory that things are better today than they were 10 years ago, or even 3 years ago. We should be proud of the steps we've made to rid our nation of this great evil of racial segregation and discrimination. On the other hand, we must realize that the plant of freedom is only a bud and not yet a flower. The Negro is freer in 1966, but he is not yet free. The Negro knows more dignity today than he has known in any point of his history in this country, but he is not yet equal. I'm appalled that some people feel that the civil rights struggle is over because we have a 1964 civil rights bill with 10 titles and a voting rights bill. Over and over again, people ask, what else do you want? They feel that everything is all right.
Dr. King said these words that Betsy, Naomi, and Ellen read to an assembly of Unitarian Universalists. If you ever wondered what he would say to us, now you know. The full speech is keynote length, but these highlights are the heart of it. Be part of the revolution. Act, don't just think. Change unjust laws and systems. Don't be satisfied with anything less than full freedom. From what I understand, this is what we are still working on. I don't think any of us can deny that we are in a period of great social change. I have no doubt that the insurrection at the Capitol 11 days ago is a response to the perceived loss of status of white people over people of color. They are fighting against the revolution, trying to prevent the world we believe in, though we have not yet seen it, where everyone's voice is heard, where all votes are counted, where we build power together rather than power over each other, where Black people can survive and thrive. So, yes, be part of the revolution. Don't wait for a better time. A better time never happens. All we have is now. It's up to us to be part of the revolution now in the way that each of us can. For some of us, that will be in public protest. For some, it will be in funding that better world. For some, it will be staying in touch with legislators about how they are doing as they help us build this world of freedom. The revolution will need childcare and sandwiches and medics. The revolution will need lawyers and chaplains. You can do something to help. And the changes of the heart, those are important. And Dr. King didn't say to stop them. What he said was to match action to our own internal work. Keep working on your heart. We're going to need our hearts ready when we show up to protest another police killing. We're going to need our hearts ready when we call the governor again to ask for greater police accountability. We're going to need our hearts ready when the work takes longer than we think it will. And we're going to need our hearts ready when progress actually comes and we figure out the next step. But Dr. King specifically asked us to change the laws. Unitarian Universalism is not and has never been an all-white religion, but it does come to us from a long line of political power allied to whiteness and money. So let's use it. Let's change some laws. Let's change how they're enforced so that Black people actually have the same rights in this country. And he asked us not to be satisfied with incremental gains. We can't accept anything less than full freedom. Dr. King has a famous quote about hope. We must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope. It's not in this speech that I'm talking about today. It comes from a later text than this one, but it speaks to me right now. Even in my very short timeline of working for racial justice, when compared with some members of this congregation, I have seen how the finite disappointments roll in like waves at the shore. Let hope be the horizon, the thing that keeps us looking up toward what is possible. Dr. King does speak about hope in this speech too, what hope means to a revolution. He says, Most revolutions in the past have been based on hope and hate, with the rising expectations of the revolutionaries implemented by hate for the perpetrators of the unjust system in the old order. I think the different thing about the revolution that has taken place in our country is that it has maintained the hope element, and at the same time, it has added the element of love. And then he defines love as overflowing goodwill to all people. This is the root of his nonviolent struggle. We shall be too full of love to obey morally unjust laws. We shall be too full of love to allow you to be comfortable in white supremacy. So at the same time, we are doing our heart work and being honest with ourselves about our experience of race in this culture, and we are challenging unjust laws in our country. We are also learning how to practice beloved community closer to home. Throughout the Unitarian Universalist Association, congregations are adding an 8th principle to the 7 in our hymnals and hanging on our walls. This principle says, we, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote, journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community, by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions. There's a lot here. I could do a sermon on every word, and maybe later I will. But as I see it, there's a why, a what, and a how in this 8th principle. What? Working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community. Every congregation wants this, from what I've seen. The beloved community, as Alex Capitan and Michael Slack have taught me, is the community where everyone is loved and welcome and heard. The trick of this, which is not actually a trick, is that it happens when we center the needs of the most marginalized person. When we listen to and invest in the work of Black women, we elect people like the Reverend Raphael Warnock, senior pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, where Dr. King once pastored. When we center the needs of Black people, of women, of trans people, of queer people, of disabled people, of immigrants, and we could go on for a while. When we center the needs of those our culture has pushed to the edges instead of normalizing those who have the most power, it's better for all of us. That's beloved community. Why? Journeying toward spiritual wholeness. We need this. White supremacy kills. It kills those who wield it and those who oppose it. Just look at the Capitol last week. Beloved community finds the wholeness in us and heals what's hurting. Spiritual wholeness reminds us to find our power in ourselves and our relationships rather than over each other. And how? By our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions. The how is the hard part. It's always the hard part. But like Dr. King, it's not asking us to just think thoughts of healing and unity. It's asking us to dismantle racism with action, with accountability, not just saying we have an eighth principle, so everything's groovy. Accountability happens in honest relationships, hearing hard truths with vulnerability in ourselves and in our institutions, doing the heart work, but also changing the culture of our congregation. What would have to change? Would we all participate in beloved conversations? How would we build relationships of accountability? How would we support the organizing of Black people, Indigenous people, and other people of color in our community? In what ways does our congregation perpetuate white supremacy? How could it not, of course, looking at where we've come from? How can we begin to change that? I gave you questions. And I hope you can stick around for the breakout sessions during social hour to hold those questions with us. This is not a thing that we do and cross off. It's an invitation to journey towards spiritual wholeness. Like I said, many congregations are discussing what the eighth principle might mean for their congregations. In fact, the Unitarian Universalist Association is undertaking a review of all of the principles and sources, as it does periodically. The question is not, how will we change the language of the principles, but how can our principles change us? How can we build that beloved community, which Dr. King and so many others have dreamed, where we shall all be free? Please get ready to sing hymn number 169, We Shall Overcome. This song has such complicated origins that I hardly know how to credit it, but let me give you something of a lineage. Over 100 years ago, a mine workers union, and a mixed race one at that, sang a gospel song, We Will Overcome, at its meetings. Along the way, parts of the tune were swapped out with a spiritual, you may know, no more auction block for me. In the 1940s, striking tobacco industry workers, mostly Black women, began singing We Will Overcome at their meetings. The organizers at Highlander School, which has trained generations of civil rights activists, learned it from them. Pete Seeger changed it from we will to we shall overcome because he liked the sounds better. And Dr. King heard Seeger sing the song in 1957. The song, as we know it, is deeply associated with the Highlander Center, which still trains civil rights activists, and with the labor and civil rights movements, particularly in the South. I invite you to sing it as a prayer, the kind of prayer that gets followed up with action.